Hello, and welcome to the Learn Dowsing training set. This training application will provide comprehensive step-by-step interactive training. You will be learning and executing blind dowsing practice targets right along with a real student class. This groundbreaking training set will also help you understand the principles of dowsing theory and provide the latest techniques and practices for the execution of real-world dowsing projects on your own. Remember, although this DVD allows you to access more advanced training segments out of sequence, please proceed through the training exercises in order. Skipping lessons or jumping ahead may have negative implications on your ability to learn the skill and participate in specific class exercises. You may go through each segment at your own pace and pause the DVD when you need a break. Feel free to go back and review past segments to help you understand lessons you have previously watched. Remember, you are not alone in your training. If at any time you are confused about a segment presented within this training program, or you would simply like to discuss dowsing with other students, visit the official dowsing training community at www.dowsingcommunity.net. This is a free service provided to all students of the Learn Dowsing DVD set and requires no obligation. Okay, let's review the materials you'll need for this training program. The Learn Dowsing set utilizes target templates that are used for the specific exercises you'll be engaging in right along with the class. These templates are ordered based on which exercise is being executed. Template Package 1 will be used for the first training target. Template Package 2 will be used for the second, and so on. You can obtain these training templates in the following places. First, if you have internet access, visit www.learndowsing.com and access the Resources page. Here you can print out all of the session templates you will be executing throughout the two DVDs. Remember, the target templates are labeled according to which exercise is being executed, beginning with Template Package 1. The template package you'll need for an associated exercise will also be made clear once you reach that training segment. Second, if you do not have access to the internet, locate the manual included inside of your Learn Dowsing set. There you will find copies of the same templates provided online. However, they will be much smaller in scale. You may consider increasing the size of the templates with a photocopier, or you may manually redraw the templates onto other sheets of blank white bond paper. Do not write on the original templates located within the manual, as this may have an impact on being able to reuse them in the future. In addition to printing out or manually creating one copy of each templates package, the following materials will also be required. First, you will need a set of L-rods and a pendulum. As with most students just beginning their dowsing training, you may not have these tools readily available. If you do not have a set of dowsing L-rods or a pendulum in your possession, please refer to the manual included in the Learn Dowsing training set for instructions to either make your own or order them through a secure online retailer. You will also need a 12-inch ruler constructed from any material, including metal, plastic, or wood, a roll of scotch or masking tape, a ream of white bond paper for taking additional notes, manually reconstructing templates, and assigning tasks or cues to dowsing targets. And finally, a black ink pen. Please note that black is traditionally used in dowsing and remote viewing sessions because it is less distracting to the analytical mind than other colors, such as blue or red. Information on how and when you will use these tools and materials will be provided in later segments. If you have all of the materials in front of you, we'll continue. If you need more time to prepare, please pause or stop the DVD now and return when you are ready. Okay, it seems that you have all of the materials necessary for the Learn Dowsing training set. Let's continue. Before we join Paul H. Smith's classroom students and begin your hands-on training, it is crucial to first eliminate the misconceptions surrounding this skill and understand the history and scientific theory behind modern-day dowsing. To accomplish this, you will be presented with an exclusive feature presenting several well-known dowsing and remote viewing experts. Your understanding of dowsing is crucial to the methods you will be required to implement for real-world dowsing targets and projects. Remember, a successful dowser is a well-educated dowser. Let's continue. The origins of dowsing can be traced back over 2,400 years ago. Perhaps the first written evidence of an early form of rod divination comes from the Greek historian Herodotus. Around 444 BC, Herodotus wrote of the Scythians, fierce warriors inhabiting the land north of the Black Sea in what is now southern Russia. As historical record, Herodotus wrote that Scythia has an abundance of soothsayers who foretell the future by means of a number of willow wands. Dowsing makes another appearance, this time in Germany, almost 1,400 years after Herodotus. In 936 AD, an antique gold coin, minted to commemorate the discovery of a silver mine on Rammelsberg Mountain, displays a man holding a forked stick in the well-known dowsing position while walking across the ground. In more recent history, about 500 years ago, a scholar by the name of Georgius Agricola documented the various uses 16th century dowsers applied to their rods. A woodcut from Agricola's historical archive shows a man among miners taking a limb from a tree to serve as a rod. Once again, it displays dowsers looking for ore and clearly showing miners where to dig. Though forms of dowsing continued to be practiced by many, the phenomenon was considered mysterious or even magical. Those that studied dowsing during these periods often speculated as to the formulation of proper techniques and methods, many personalizing their process. As a result, nobody could be entirely sure what process was the most efficient, or more importantly, why or how dowsing worked. In 1630, Bernard Cassius and Athanasius Kircher were some of the first to attempt to study dowsing from a more rigorous scientific perspective. Kircher, after refusing to accept a magical interpretation of dowsing, spent much time trying to understand the mechanism by which the process worked. Though he ultimately failed, he paved the way for later efforts to examine dowsing separate from any magical theories. Despite the lack of scientific understanding and widespread skeptical resistance, even as we approach the 21st century, parts of society continued to embrace the notion that dowsing worked and could be an effective tool in one's daily life. Today, articles continue to appear in mainstream publications, including the Reader's Digest, the Washington Post, and the official magazine of the Smithsonian Institution, all attempting to provide additional insight into this ancient skill, supplying evidence that there was more to dowsing than meets the eye. Unfortunately, many misconceptions generated throughout the last several hundred years regarding what dowsing could be used for and why or how it worked have carried through to today's practices, such as the notion that dowsing rods are controlled by some sort of invisible force, or even the idea that one is required to use certain tools like rods or sticks. But probably the greatest misconception still widely believed today is that dowsing can only be utilized to locate conductive substances such as water or metals. But without extensive and conclusive modern-day research, nobody could know for sure the mechanics behind dowsing, or even if it worked at all. In the early 1970s, as dowsing continued to capture people's interest, the public was unaware that this ability was about to be put through the ultimate test. A scientific endeavor utilizing several of the most brilliant physicists and researchers who would exhaust the use of every modern technological tool the world had to offer. Not only to uncover the secret behind dowsing, but all related extrasensory perception. This time, the subconscious mind wouldn't be studied out of curiosity. It would be studied out of necessity.
We're trying to track down hostages. That are being held by Islamic terrorist groups in the Middle East. We were trying to track down narco traffickers, contraband, terrorists. They assigned us to find terrorists or missiles that were being moved around in the Middle East. And so we were looking for, I and my colleagues were looking for something more to employ, some technique, some device or tool, something that would help us to be able to actually find things. Some scientists out at Stanford Research Institute, which eventually became known as SRI, among them was a physicist named Hal Puthoff, were working on a problem. The CIA had noted that the Soviets were seriously looking into spending a lot of money researching into parapsychology kind of effects. And the CIA approached Puthoff and his associates and asked them to do some serious research in this for various reasons. They were good choices for that. And so they started researching it and discovered there were applications that actually not only were the Soviets probably on to something, but that we could actually use our own people using these parapsychological skills or abilities to spy on the Russians.
I was at Stanford Research Institute and doing laser research and so on. And I had circulated a proposal for doing some exotic particle physics experiments. And just by chance, in a social situation, Ingo Swann, who was claimed a well-known psychic, wrote me a letter and said, well, I see you're interested in exotic physics, so you may be interested in the kind of things I do, which is psychokinesis. Ordinarily, I would just throw that in the trash, but in this case, he included a copy of a report from City College in New York where he had actually done some successful experiments. So just on a lark, I invited him out, and we did some experiments, and they were quite remarkable, and so I circulated them around to my physics colleagues, and then pretty soon the CIA showed up at my doorstep. And they said, have we been looking for you? I said, well, why? They said, well, we've been tracking Soviet research in this area for several years. They're spending a lot of money at some of their best institutes with their best people. But scientists in the West don't even think there is such a thing as ESP.
The CIA and the United States military launched an aggressive top-secret research program to discover effective protocols to utilize the inherent abilities of the human mind for military operations. This research engagement became known as the Remote Viewing Program.
Remote viewing is a process whereby someone accesses, by some mental means, some location that's remote in time or space and describes it by means that you can't just assign to analysis or intuition or logic.
The name remote viewing, or RV, is actually a misnomer. It may be more accurately described as remote sensing or remote perception. Resulting from countless studies conducted with Ingo Swann, a military contracted subject whom many refer to as the father of remote viewing, findings suggest that all humans contain an inherent ability to gather information about any place, person, thing, or event in the past, present, or future through the subconscious mind. Remote viewing is commonly misunderstood by the public and actually refers to a specific, teachable protocol that virtually anyone can follow. In theory, it's as easy as learning to play the piano. As a result, misconceptions about individuals believed to possess a unique natural ability to obtain information about future events or hidden targets quickly dissipated as a psychic function and began to be viewed simply as a skill, one that each person possesses to a certain degree. During early military operations, a trained viewer would receive a target from a project manager. However, the target would be encoded in a manner in which the viewer could not possibly decipher what the true target was. Though the process may seem confusing, think of it as a way of encryption. It was a method utilized in order to keep the targets blind to the viewer. The idea is that if the subconscious was truly at work, your analytical mind could remain hidden to the target, and yet your subconscious mind should already know what it is that you are seeking. The first basic protocols were developed to help force the mind to follow a specific set of steps to call forth information in a set sequence directly from the subconscious mind, and variations of this are still used today. The viewer would begin to follow the specific sequence of steps, starting with sensory perceptions, writing down colors, textures, smells, tastes, and so on, and eventually recording dimensional contacts, including motions and densities. Even with the initial protocols, it was crucial to move quickly and without delay, without thinking, never deviating from the process. The descriptors were recorded across several pages, calling forth data directly from the subconscious. After about 45 minutes in session, the data was then translated into a sketch which contained the hidden target. Dowsing, though functioning through a very different protocol from remote viewing, contains many similarities with regards to brain and subconscious function. However, the secret behind dowsing wouldn't be discovered until later in the military program. And while it may sound like remote viewing or dowsing was taken right out of a science fiction movie, the CIA and military intelligence couldn't ignore the shocking results. Although the research was still in its infancy, little could anyone imagine that the program would become a 20-year-long, multi-million-dollar endeavor that would end up changing the face of warfare forever.
Well, we were doing remote viewing in general for the U.S. military, specifically for Army INSCOM, Intelligence and Security Command. And then it turned out that rather than getting descriptions of particular sites, they had a lot of requirements, operational requirements for finding things. For example, a bug in a room, the location of a downed plane, location of an individual, an agent, say. And so they asked us, could we do the inverse of remote viewing? Rather than having a case where we knew where the location was, what was there, this was a case of, well, we know what it is we're looking for, we just don't know where it is.
We were tasked on various hostage situations in the Middle East, whereas Terry Waite, whereas Colonel Higgins, whereas a number of other hostages that were being held by Hezbollah and some other friends. And we could actually describe the setting that these people were in, but when it came to actually putting our finger on a map and saying they're here, we were not able to do that. And so we started looking into ways of doing this, and one of those things we hit on was dowsing. I found out later that we were in a way reinventing the wheel, because in the early days of the remote viewing program, they had experimented with dowsing as well, tried some things out. But in transition from one set of personnel to another, some of that institutional knowledge had gotten lost, and so here we were trying to rediscover that. And another book was published called The Divining Hand by Christopher Bird. It's become kind of the handbook of dowsing, and it's very well written, but it had some startling revelations in it. It noted that a certain dowser named Louis Metacia had actually taught the U.S. military how to dowse during Vietnam, searching for hidden tunnels, searching for landmines, booby traps, and things like that. And that, in fact, there was even a newspaper article published that reported on the Marines actually using this skill in Vietnam to some success.
We built a combat village to train troops who are going to Vietnam. They taught the Marines in Camp Pendleton. I taught the ones at Camp Lejeune, they went over there. I taught the Marines at Quantico. I'll tell you what they found that I never even knew, which I thought was very significant. They found the communication system of the Viet Cong. He said, Viet Cong bury their orders in bamboo tubes and put them under the trail. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. He said, they found them. See, once you tell the Marines the system and they learn it, all they do is turn them loose and they'll find it, whatever you want to find. They knew these guys were dowsing everything in the book. Once you show them and they get results, then they're pretty well believers.
Even though some success with dowsing was reported in Vietnam before the official remote viewing program began, some military researchers were skeptical that past recorded successes were simply a matter of luck rather than human intuition.
In the beginning, we thought this was just some peculiar aspect of human consciousness or whatever. But as we gathered a lot of data, of course, it wasn't all perfect remote viewing, and we could see that there were certain patterns to the errors and certain patterns to what was correctly perceived and so on. And so as we began looking into those patterns and then looking into the general research on consciousness and perception in general, we found that in fact our data was not skewed off to the side, but actually seemed to match into areas that were well understood in consciousness and perception. Specifically, the remote viewing seemed to be mediated more by the right hemisphere of the brain, which tends to be a pattern recognition, holistic kind of integration unit, as opposed to the left hemisphere, which is more of analysis and reading and mathematics and that kind of thing. And then we would look at the data coming out of, say, stroke victims, where maybe the left hemisphere would have had a stroke, and so people struggle with trying to describe what they're seeing in their ordinary environment. And the kind of errors they would make were exactly the kind of errors remote viewers were making. So in the end, we began to realize that this seems to be integrated into our general perceptual and consciousness functions, fitting hand in glove with other things that are near. Actually, remote viewing should probably be called remote sensing, because we found as time went on that drawings tended to, for example, be better than descriptions of visual scenes. And so it seems like the data comes in at kind of a kinesthetic level in the motor system. And so once we realized that, then the training techniques that were developed began with just trying to put down sketches, not trying to visualize what the scenes are. And that seemed to be a help. So there's sort of a connection there with dowsing, in the sense that people who douse with, say, forked sticks tend to get a ideomotor response. And so that seems to be a general feature of this kind of functioning.
There have been a number of scientific experiments attempting to verify whether dowsing works or not. What's interesting is that some of the best experiments weren't actually known until just recently. These were the ones that were done in secret, under contract to the CIA or the Army or whoever happened to be providing the funding at the time, in support of the remote viewing program.
Starting out with simple experiments like hiding things in boxes and envelopes, but then our remote viewers insisted on doing something more challenging, like describing sites where somebody was sent at random. And what really sent it off with a heavy spark was that we viewed some classified facilities and got data that was thought to be not obtainable by this kind of thing.
The original idea, when they were fielding the MX missiles in response to one of the big Soviet missiles that had just recently been introduced, was because the Soviet missiles were now more accurate, they could take out our missile silos on first strike, and that was a big worry. If the Soviets could take out our weapons, our nuclear weapons, right off on their first firing, then we could be left powerless and not be able to touch the Soviet Union back, which counteracted the mutual deterrence problem. So the MX basing plan, the idea behind that was that you had a bunch of shelters in the desert, and then you shuttled the missile between these shelters, and so the Soviets had no idea which shelter they were in.
The MX missile system, the so-called shell game that was being looked at in the Carter administration, where the idea was to have 20 missile silos located in a circle someplace, and then an underground railroad train that would shuttle the missile from one location to another. And so we also did an exploration of was there a way to defeat that? Specifically, it was a threat analysis study. Was there a way for the Soviets to defeat the MX system? One of our consultants, Charlie Tart, at University of California, Davis, had set up a system whereby he had basically a computer screen that had 10 circles on it, and there was a random number generator program within a computer that chose one of those as being the target, but didn't display it on the screen. And then the subject had to push a button, and then the target would be changed, its position would be changed, and have to do it again, and so on. And so we had one excellent subject who did 500 trials, and you'd expect 1 out of 10 by chance. And in fact, she averaged 1 out of 4. And so we had the data from that experiment, and so we decided to mock up an MX scenario with 10 silos. And we had a very sophisticated statistical averaging program called sequential sampling that we used. And so we ran that set of data through the statistical analysis program, and within that number of trials, we were able to do 12 attempts at finding which silo was the missile in this simulation. 12 out of 12, we got the right answer. We had no misses. So the probability of doing that by chance was 1 in a trillion.
The MX missile experiments provided the realization that the U.S. military could indeed utilize dowsing or remote viewing to gather data that couldn't be obtained by any other means. But then, hypothetically, so could the enemy. This was now becoming an issue of national security. Although early experiments provided statistically significant results, including accuracy uncovering the location of hidden nuclear warheads, it wasn't a solidified system. The program was still young, and researchers strived to create more effective protocols. The potential, however, was undeniable.
The idea behind all of these statistical procedures was that people can do this better than chance, but it's not terrifically better than chance. I mean, it would be unusual for a dowser to tell me to go dig somewhere for a treasure on a single shot. But with the statistical application that would come from the application of these procedures, we get up 60, 70, 80% hit rates. So even if you're off, if you're out there doing a search, let's say you're doing a search for a downed airplane, or you're searching for a submarine, or whatever, simply starting with the square that the remote viewers or the dowsers have ticked off is going to save you time. I mean, we calculated how much time would be saved, and in many cases, roughly 60% of the time would be saved if you at least started from the square chosen by a dowser. And when I talk about statistical significance, you know, you hear numbers like 1 in 100, say, or the odds of getting it by chance are 1 in 100. You really have to put that in perspective. I mean, it's as if you had a bag of 99 white balls and 1 black ball, and you ask a person to reach in and only pull out the black ball. If they're successful, that's odds of 1 in 100. So then when you realize that in some of these experiments we got odds of 1 in 50,000, it's a really extremely significant result.
With tests now utilizing updated protocols achieving accuracy rates up to 80%, it was time for the military to move the research program into real-world operations.
There were a number of experiments, and there were a number of successful dowsing operations done in which actual people were captured and materials recovered using dowsing.
There's a procedure in addition to dowsing, which we would just call map dowsing. Here's your 20 by 20 grid, and you want to have somebody sort of attempt to determine where. And by the way, we had very good statistical procedures for that, because you could do a statistical analysis of, well, how close were you to the target? You didn't have to get right on it. And another approach we use was just simply the simple remote viewing, and that is have somebody remote view, let's say, a downed aircraft and sort of target in on the aircraft and then try to pull back in the remote viewing and describe the surrounding terrain. In one case, for a plane that went down in Zaire, that was basically how the plane was located. That is, the person was able to say, well, there's where the mountains are, there's where the river is, etc. And then when they got out a map of the area, they said, well, this looks like this region. And I think they were like within 5 miles, and the plane was found. It was a Soviet plane that had gone down in Zaire, and we wanted to get to it before the Russians did because it was a very valuable piece of apparatus. And in fact, we sent people in, and just as they got to the target site, some natives were carrying pieces of the plane out. So, in fact, this actually worked.
The use of remote viewing and dowsing in these real-world operations were also successful, but in addition, studies from thousands of session results provided another shocking realization. Could dowsing and remote viewing actually be learned?
There was definitely a learning effect shown in a number of these experiments, that people who had perhaps marginal dowsing skills at the start of the experiment actually showed that their performance improved as they went on and got more practice at it. Showed that there actually was statistically significant effects when you measured these things scientifically. And that data is just now coming out.
But what we found was that in a number of cases, people improved over time. So I think those learning trends, they were certainly real. They were statistically significantly real. Certainly in ordinary remote viewing, we found that with repeated trials, people did improve. So my hypothesis going in for the dowsing would be that with many repeated trials with some technique, improvement might be expected.
In 1995, after 23 years of successful operations, policy changes within the CIA forced the program, now known as Stargate, into declassification. Trained military personnel, including expert Paul H. Smith, retired and soon began providing these once top-secret protocols to the public. Advancements in dowsing and other ESP skills didn't stop with the declassification of the military program. As the private sector became aware of the previous scientific research, new public interest arose. Funding and new experimentation through private research organizations and instructors continued to make dowsing more efficient with newer, streamlined protocols and increasingly effective training methods. Now, modern dowsing was free to be used by anyone who was willing to give it a try, including employees with major telephone and utility companies.
The routine to hunt for telephone lines that were buried in the ground is to use this very elaborate and very expensive technology developed by AT&T Bell Laboratory scientists. It involved a very powerful signal generator and a very sensitive receiver. What they would do is they would work from one end of the telephone line that was buried, send a strong electrical signal through it, and then use the sensitive receiver and wander all over the countryside looking for the other end of the telephone line or where the signal was being transmitted underground along the length of that line. What they actually did, they never actually pulled out this kit containing this very expensive AT&T Bell Laboratory equipment. Instead, what they did is they took some pieces of pipe, some heavy gauge copper wire, they bent the copper wires into 90-degree angles, affixed them to the pipes, and they dowsed. And these were the same guys that had to dig these cables up. They had to dig some ditches and trenches very deep to get access to these cables to do whatever repair work or whatever construction work they were having to do. They had a 100% success rate in both not locating cables that were not underground in certain fields and being able to locate cable that were known to be under certain fields.
With dowsing growing in popularity, it didn't take long for people to realize that dowsing provided the potential for financial gain as well. People like Louis Matasha.
And I went to Virginia Beach, and we dug Virginia Beach up and found tremendous number of coins. I felt so sorry for these metal detecting people. They came up and he had 35 cents and we had a bucket full of jewelry. No one has ever found jewelry on the beach like we did.
Mr. Matesha has released several books regarding treasure hunting with dowsing and was credited for several phenomenal discoveries, from locating buried silver bars to gold coins. His exploits are well documented, and to this day, he has been one of the most successful treasure hunters who have relied mostly on dowsing. But uses for dowsing didn't stop with treasure hunting. Gambling was also a target.
Blacks and reds on a roulette wheel. In fact, on the side, I and some friends did go to Lake Tahoe, and we did make money.
The stories abound. Dowsers winning the lottery, locating treasure, gambling, finding optimum stock market investments, and making important corporate and personal decisions. But what makes ESP-related skills such as dowsing actually work? The answer lies almost entirely with the subconscious mind. If you don't understand what the subconscious is, you're not alone. Many individuals may have an idea of when they receive information from this area of consciousness, but few understand it. Moments such as someone calling you on the phone just as you were thinking about them, or having the feeling that something unfortunate is happening or about to occur. Due to the lack of a better explanation, many refer to this as intuition, listening to your gut, or feeling a vibe. We can think of human consciousness as being divided into two regions. One is referred to as conscious awareness, and the other as the subconscious. As we proceed through each waking moment, the flood of smells, colors, sounds, tastes, and textures coming through our senses from the outside world are initially processed by our subconscious, not our conscious awareness. In fact, only a minuscule percentage of our environmental data is passed up and out of the subconscious and into our conscious awareness.
Well, the basis of remote viewing functionality isn't necessarily conscious interaction. The conscious aspects of it come last. We become aware of the remote viewing signal in the final stages of this. Most of the work is being done at what's generally known as a subconscious level. We talk in terms of the subconscious, the human subconscious, being connected with the rest of the universe in some interesting way that allows us to get information from places distant or hidden from us in some way. That all that information is available to the subconscious. It's just bringing up into conscious awareness where it can be useful that we run into difficulties. Notoriously, the subconscious is a repository for huge amounts of information, hundreds of thousands, millions of data bits that never make it up into conscious awareness. The bandwidth between subconscious and conscious is very narrow, and only a small amount of information ever comes to our cognition that we can actually work with in a conscious way. That's normal for any kind of sense. And when you add this ESP material in there, that's additional information that has to compete for that narrow bandwidth. So the trick is how do we get that information and make it available so that we can use it? Well, in remote viewing, the idea is you go through this process that we were trained in the military to access the information, the factual information, the visual information, in order for us to put it down on a piece of paper to express it and make it available for analysts.
But how does all of this explain the movement that occurs with dowsing rods? Let's think for a moment of a seismograph. This is a sensitive instrument designed to measure sudden movements in the earth, such as those caused by earthquakes. Some seismographs are so responsive that they can catch subtle variations from the other side of the planet. Dowsing rods work on this same principle, but instead of being affected by the Earth's subtle movements, they're affected by the human nervous system.
A lot of different theories about how dowsing works. The one that predominated for a long time was magnetism. The idea was that somehow the dowser was able to identify, or that there was a magnetic interaction between the dowser and the whatever's trying to be located. Now, this normally happened when the dowser was looking for water, or when the dowser was dowsing for minerals, or that kind of thing. That was the explanation that was used. And so they'd go and, they'd dowse for it, and supposedly there's this attraction that caused the rods to work or whatever. In fact, later on, when it seemed apparent that there was no such force that was strong enough to make these rods work, particularly ones made out of wood, which are non-magnetic anyway, the feeling got to be that there was some inner mechanism that dowsers possess. If you imagine yourself, for example, throwing a ball, even though it's just your imagination, the muscles that actually would be involved in throwing that ball actually get activated, and there are micro movements. Even though you never actually perform the motion, your muscles, in a way, perform it just at a much lower level, so that's not noticeable. And any time we have those kind of ideas of any kind of action or activity, our muscles respond at a very low level, so we're not even aware of it, but nonetheless it's happening. It's called the ideomotor response. When people go out to dowse, then that ideomotor response, they're expecting to find water, and so when they come to a place where they think water is, even though they're consciously trying very hard not to move the rods themselves, there's this involuntary motion of the muscles, which they're not even aware of, that cause the instrument, the pendulum, the rods, or whatever, to actually move.
The nervous system can generate subtle movements that are undetectable by our conscious awareness, so it's easy to understand why some dowsers may believe that an invisible force is responsible for moving their tools when they use L-rods or pendulums. But the question still remains, how does the subconscious know the answers to the information you are seeking in the first place, especially information that would seem to be unobtainable, such as locating buried treasure, or knowing what the next winning color on a roulette wheel will be? This aspect of ESP-related skill might still be one of the most mysterious and controversial topics in related scientific research. But thanks to quantum physics, a theory called quantum entanglement may provide new insight into how the subconscious can obtain what some previously believed to be unobtainable.
There may be explanations available in quantum physics, but in only a narrow scope of it, a feature called non-locality, which has the idea that things are entangled. There's several different terms for it: Bell's theorem, non-locality, quantum entanglement. There's some interesting features of that part of quantum theory that might explain not just things like dowsing, but also things like remote viewing or ESP in general. The idea here is that physical particles, not subatomic particles, that become entangled sometime in their past, they establish a kind of a causative correlation, so that when they're separated by a long distance sometime in the future, if you affect one, then you have an instant effect on the other. Some of the results of the experiments in this suggest the sorts of things you encounter when you're doing dowsing and remote viewing.
At one time, physicists believed that atoms were the smallest form of matter in existence. Then we discovered atoms were actually comprised of even smaller particles called electrons, protons, and neutrons. Today, we now know that even deeper levels of subatomic particles exist in the composition of all matter, including biological life, forms of energy, and neurons, a component for human thought. As the name implies, entanglement occurs when two or more of these subatomic particles form an association at what is now believed to be the lowest level of subatomic existence. The association between these particles allow influences that affect one particle to occur to the other instantly and regardless of distance. As a result, some researchers refer to this as non-locality, nullifying the idea that information travels between the particles, and instead, that it is somehow already and instantaneously connected at another level of existence. While this may seem inconceivable to some, it's no more astonishing than at one time theorizing how the splitting of an atom could not only be possible, but that it could be harnessed as a destructive weapon. The advancements made within quantum mechanics, including the theory of quantum entanglement, may begin to provide the answers to how the subconscious mind is able to obtain information about an unknown or remote target, providing insight into the mechanics behind dowsing and all related ESP skill. With convincing military test results, personal experiences, and new sciences providing a glimpse into how our thought function may truly operate, why are there still skeptics?
Skeptics don't like dowsing because they have no way of explaining how it works. They are opposed to it for many of the same reasons they're opposed to ESP or similar kinds of so-called paranormal phenomena. There is no causative explanation that fits into any of our physical models. Until we come up with a really good theory that seems to satisfy them, aren't going to be pleased. They think this is literally spooky action at a distance, to borrow words from Einstein. They think that it's all smoke and mirrors, and that all people involved in dowsing or ESP in general are charlatans or deluded, one or the other, and they want to reject all of this stuff because it seems to undermine the worldview that is currently held by science.
I had a teacher, and I traveled all over the United States, and I went to see the people that knew what they were talking about. And that's how I did it, because you can learn how to drive a car, but if you're going to be a race car driver, you're going to have to get the experts to teach you what to do. The beginner can do it. He just goes and see what happens, but it's all mental. You just focus, and it will do it. A lot of times, when I trained the Marines, I just threw a pencil on the ground. I said, walk over that pencil and see if those wires react. Whammo! They spread apart immediately. I said, that's the pencil. Now you put it on your head, tunnel. Now you walk around this village and find a tunnel. Whammo! It opened up right away.
One of the big issues with remote viewing is something called analytical overlay. And the problem with analytical overlay is that analytical overlay is also known as mental noise. These are the imaginings, the thoughts, the analyses, all the stuff that's going on in our conscious minds, expectation, that sort of thing, that end up contaminating the signal line. Let's say the target you're trying to describe is the Eiffel Tower. You as a remote viewer have no idea that it's the Eiffel Tower you're trying to describe. All you know is you've been given a set of coordinates or a certain number, and you are just going through the process. You get an impression of crisscrossing metallic structures and cold, bumpy, rivety kinds of things. You get these impressions. And that's all accurate about the Eiffel Tower. The problem is that it also matches the bridge that you drove over on your way into work that morning. And so all of a sudden your conscious awareness guesses, it jumps to a conclusion, oh, it's a bridge. Well, it isn't a bridge, it's the Eiffel Tower. But you have come to that false conclusion based on this interesting process. The same thing can happen with dowsing, where you may have conscious expectations that cause the ideomotor response. What you want to do is to be able to learn how to let the actual signal, dowsing signal, come through the subconscious and be the thing that motivates the indications of your devices, whatever device you're using, and not have it be your conscious awareness that's motivating that. And that's where, of course, the challenge is, to learn to tell the difference and to allow the one to operate and not allow the other one to interfere.
There's a certain portion that is natural ability, and the other portion is a lot of hard work and sticking to it. Everybody has it. It's just a part of your makeup, and everybody's makeup. The ability to do it mostly rests, I think, with a person's own belief system, whether they believe they can do it or not, and how much work they want to put into it to be successful. The more practice, and you'll hear this by remote viewing teachers, the people who teach it today, and even in the unit, practice, practice, practice. There's a lot more to humans and people than just being analytical robots in the tech age.
We're almost ready to join Paul Smith's student class. At this point, you may pause or stop the DVD and take a break if you desire. If you are ready to continue, we'll proceed to segment 3. Throughout the Learn Dowsing training set, we will review the processes and protocols utilized for 5 different forms of modern dowsing, which include on-site dowsing, map dowsing, diagram dowsing, dowsing matrices, and timeline dowsing. As we proceed through the lesson segments, you will also be instructed to execute several practice targets using various tools and techniques in association with each form of dowsing. And you'll be provided the opportunity to compare your dowsing results with the class students after each exercise. In addition, we will review how to set up your own practice targets at home and how to use dowsing as a beneficial tool in your daily life. We now join Paul Smith and the student dowsers as he provides beginner advice, as well as an introductory explanation of analytical overlay, one of the greatest pitfalls for beginning dowsers.
The idea with analytical overlay, of course, is interference of your conscious processing. Now, that can actually happen at a level that you almost think of as unconscious, because it can happen very quickly, and you may not be really aware of how your conscious awareness then contributed the wrong answer to something. So how does analytical overlay interfere with the dowsing situation? Well, some of you have had that experience today where you have thought something about the target and proceeded to attempt to not have that in your head, but nonetheless, in a way, it guided your hand to do something that turned out to be wrong. Okay? Your conscious mind has a lot of control over what you do, over your volition, over your decision making and everything. And so it's always helpful to improve your understanding how to deal with that. And practice is usually the best way. One of the reasons that you want to not take too long dwelling on a specific dowsing problem, but try and efficiently go through it, capture it thoroughly, but don't take too long to do it, is because the longer you dwell on it, the more your consciousness, your conscious awareness has time to work on it as well and introduce red herring that lead you off into the sunset in the wrong direction or whatever. The goal of trying to manage what your conscious awareness is doing is obviously so that you be more correct more often. And there are a couple of ways of overcoming the interference that it gives. One of which is to not take so long, to be, don't want to say spontaneous, because that can be also impulsive. And being impulsive will get you in trouble almost as much as being too deliberate. There's a fine line here that you have to learn, usually by trial and error, and lots of practice and taking practice opportunities. But oftentimes you've probably all noticed this in your lives, that oftentimes the first impression you get about something turns out to be the right thing. Right? And you sit there and think about it and second guess it and talk yourself out of it, and later on you say, oh darn, that was how I should have done it after all, or that's the decision I should have made. I knew it up front and I talked myself out of it. Well, you got to be careful, because you can do that with dowsing as well. So particularly when you're in a learning mode, it's usually best to take your first impression and go with it and not go back and recheck it and go over it and reconfirm it and is that right, well, I'm not so sure if I feel that way about it anymore. And you've gone so much that you've muddied the water, so to speak. Yeah, it's all jumbled up, and so when you do get your feedback, you're no longer quite sure exactly what it was you're experiencing. So usually it's better to take a cut at it, see how you did, check your feedback, find out, oh, I was off like this, take another cut at it, go back again, check your feedback, oh, I'm closer this time. Do that trial and error, and you'll sometimes be more successful, and you'll feel really good about that. There are other times that you will just be not getting anything, and you'll feel very frustrated and depressed. The point is, don't take any of this personally, okay? It's a standard learning process of a difficult kind of intuitional skill, and you're bound to have a lot of failures along with a lot of successes. What's important is to look at your overall progress. When I was trying to teach myself guitar, I read something that was very interesting. One of the books I was reading said that this person had always counseled his students that after they've been playing for a little while, when they're really discouraged and their fingers hurt like crazy and they felt like they were not getting anywhere, to just at that point turn the guitar over and try and do it with their other hand. Because that was the stage they were at 3 weeks before, when they didn't know how to do anything. And it's interesting that you see the contrast between what you really can do now and what you couldn't do before. You have made progress, it just doesn't seem that way all the time. A gut feeling feels different, or at least as far as we know, or can know, everybody's gut feeling feels different than everybody else's gut feeling feels, okay? We tend to know what that means when somebody says it. But that doesn't necessarily translate even into dowsing success. Your experience of being on dowsing may be way different than a gut feeling, okay? That may work in larger intuitional things like taking your umbrella, but a foreign point on a map, that feeling may be completely different. The way you do it, and this is the way you do it in remote viewing when you try and get people to recognize when they're on or not, is you put them in the barrel and you make them try it. And trial and error, that's why practice is important. Trial and error, they will learn themselves what it feels like to be on and what it feels like not to be on. But that only happens if they're honest with themselves. There's lots of people who will do this, and they'll do it, and they'll fool themselves into thinking they're doing it when they're actually really data fitting. They're saying, well, oh, look, I was here. That's within 5 miles of the target. That's close enough, you know, that counts. Well, no, it depends on what the criteria are. Right? But see, that's the whole point of all this. You learn the methodologies, you learn the techniques, and then you put yourself in environments where you either fail or succeed, and you check yourself to see what you were doing when you succeeded or when you failed, how you felt when you succeeded or when you failed, and you do it often enough, you'll start to learn. It's exactly how you learn to ride a bike. You get on the bike and you fall off of that sucker, right? You get on it again and you fall off again. And any skill that's subjective like this, where individual inner experience is what makes it work, and what is the difference between success and failure, that's how it works. You learn the principles, you learn the practice, and then you get the experience. Knowing that was factual knowledge, like this is the brake on the bike, this is the L rod, this is how you hold it, this is what you're trying to accomplish with it when you do it. That's all the knowing that. The knowing how, however, is completely different than that. It's a different kind of knowing, and that you only get it by actually getting involved in having the experience and doing the work and falling off of your bike and getting back on it. And if anybody tells you any different, you're not going to learn.
As reviewed in segment 2, information is first received and processed by the subconscious mind before it enters analytical reasoning and conscious awareness. Though more simply stated than executed, the key to dowsing is to remove your assumptions and analytical reasoning regarding the desired information, thereby obtaining more intuitional data from the subconscious rather than from analytical means. Because your analytical mind is such a large part of your daily life, we are conditioned to use it for everything. Therefore, ignoring your analytical thoughts may seem extremely difficult for beginners. Let's continue. We'll begin by learning to use a pendulum. As previously instructed, you should have one nearby. At this time, please pick it up and begin to familiarize yourself with the weight and feel of the tool as Paul Smith explains how they are used.
Okay, so you want to get your pendulum so that you have an understanding between your conscious awareness and your subconscious what different motions of the pendulum mean. One approach is to get the pendulum going in a circle, okay, get it swinging in a circle, and then say something like, show me a yes. And I'm going to make this do it on purpose, but the idea is then your subconscious decides what it's going to give you as the feedback for yes, and then you say, show me a no, and then your subconscious decides what it's going to give you as a no. Okay? One of the reasons why this usually is what people end up with is that there's a convention in our culture that nodding your head means yes and shaking your head side to side means no. And so there's probably some psychological element here that makes us want to think this is yes and think of this as no. It just depends on what you and your subconscious agree on as being the message that you're getting. In remote viewing, you're encouraged not to close your eyes because alpha is increased closing. That corresponds to mental visualization, and it can actually encourage the formation of AOLs by closing your eyes, although some people do fine by doing that. In dowsing, we're not having that same issue. Okay, that same issue isn't a problem. So you could close your eyes, and at different times, you might find this useful at other times too, when you're doing tasking, when you're trying to do something else. Because we don't care about mental imagery, we're relying on the autonomic sorts of responses that you get. Autonomic is not the right word. Spontaneous sorts of responses you get translated into the motion of the pendulum. Okay. Why don't we try programming our pendulums now?
Let's begin by programming your pendulum. Programming is a method of training your subconscious to indicate specific responses during a dowsing session. For the purpose of our first training exercise, you will be programming an indication for yes and an indication for no. Note that the process for the programming phase differs slightly from the process for active dowsing. However, this will be explained in the next segment. First, begin by moving your pendulum in a small circular motion like this. Note that the direction of rotation is up to you, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Then, through subtle movements, intentionally make the pendulum move forward and away from you, like this. Think to yourself, this means yes. Okay, now to program the no response. Once again, begin by moving your pendulum in a small circular motion. Then, through subtle movements, make the pendulum move from the left to the right, like this. Think to yourself, this means no. Remember, at this point, you are not actually dowsing. The purpose of doing this is to train yourself so that the micro movements generated by your subconscious mind indicate the correct answer through your pendulum. It may take some practice before your programmed responses become natural, so it is crucial that you repeat the programming phase multiple times before attempting to do active dowsing. Let's try the programming process again. Please follow along. Move your pendulum in a small circular motion and make the tool move forward and away from your body. Focus and think to yourself, this means yes. Now move your pendulum in a small circular motion and make the tool move from the left to the right. Think to yourself, this means no. I'll give you some time to practice a little more on your own. Look away from the screen and remember to focus only on the feedback indications. Try not to be distracted from surrounding noises, colors, and random thoughts. Begin now. Now that you have familiarized yourself with the pendulum and the programming process, let's continue. Learning the process for programming a pendulum is a great step, but before we can execute your first real dowsing target, you must define the dowsing task and know how to identify an accurate feedback indication. Paul Smith explains.
When you actually use the pendulum, these are guidelines that are helpful. Get what you're looking for firmly in your mind. Okay. Basically, this corresponds to having precise tasking in a remote viewing session. Vague tasking will give you too much latitude, and you may end up reporting stuff that has got nothing to do with the target because the tasking was not sufficiently precise. That is especially the case here. If you have an imprecise tasking, the pendulum may actually give you the right answer to the wrong question. Okay? So you want to be very clear what your tasking is. And I suggest not just that you have it clear in your mind, but you actually write it down. You're objectifying, of course, but you're also making sure that you don't forget, that you don't get too loose with your wording or whatever. What you ask for is what you get. And a single word can change your meaning, except your original answer. If you keep asking the same question over and over again, it'll end up telling you what you want to know rather than what the correct answer is. And those aren't usually the same thing. Oftentimes we want one answer and there's actually a different answer, except the first time. Now, this may mean that you'll have a lot of wrong answers at first when you're first learning how to do this. If you take the first answer and you haven't really learned the process and how you work internally, oftentimes you may get the wrong answer and you're just going to accept that answer up front. That's fine, because it actually enables your learning process. Take your first answer, don't try and second guess yourself. If you're really not confident, now there's an exception to that. The exception to that is when you realize that you messed up, that you maybe weren't focusing very well, or you just did something wrong, and you know that that answer is totally unreliable. Toss it out, count it like as analytical overlay, get rid of it, and then start over again, and this time do it right. Focus correctly, and follow, and do it the way you know works from your experience. Okay? You should be able to know or recognize when you're getting tired. You don't want to overdo this. This is a lot like remote viewing. You can overtrain. Okay? You want to do just enough, but if you feel like you're starting to lose the edge, don't push it too far. If you push it too far, you're likely then to mess things up and you may lose ground rather than gain ground. And quit on a high, that old slogan, applies here just as much as it does in remote viewing.
This may seem like a lot of information to absorb, but don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. Remember, you're also free to go back and watch previously viewed lesson segments at any time. The best way to begin training your subconscious for dowsing is to jump right in and try it. So you're going to be executing your very first dowsing target shortly. But first, let's watch an example of someone executing a dowsing session just like the one you are about to do. I'll walk you through the entire dowsing process utilizing a pendulum and explain what's going on as the student performs the dowsing exercise. Remember, this is just a sample, so feel free to set down your pendulum and relax, but be sure to pay close attention to the following instructions and pace of the dowser. The dowser has been presented with 10 cups. One of these cups contains a US quarter. The dowser is tasked with determining which cup the coin is located under. The first step is to write down or verbalize the task. In this case, the dowser wants to know under which cup is the coin hidden. Next, the student picks up a pendulum and begins by moving the pendulum in a small circular motion. During this process, the dowser must be focused only on the intent of the specific dowsing task. At this point, you cannot verbalize the task because speech is processed by the left hemisphere of the brain. This will influence analytical thought and invite imagination. Do not try to guess the answer, but rather try to feel your intuitional responses. The dowser gets the impression that the answer is no, based upon the pendulum, and moves on to the next cup. Remember to focus more on the intent of your task and not what you believe will be the direction of the pendulum. Focusing too much on the motion of the pendulum can introduce analytical overlay. Unlike the programming phase, after you have begun the circular motion, do not intentionally make the pendulum move in a certain direction. Try to hold your hand perfectly still while only focusing on your intent. Remember, your subconscious mind already knows the answer. As the dowsing process is repeated for each cup, you should generally take no longer than 5 to 10 seconds to determine a response. With most individuals, controlling your analytical thought is extremely difficult, and dwelling on a decision will eventually invite analytical overlay, also called AOL. During this process, you may catch yourself trying to guess the answer or becoming distracted. At this point, you must discard the thought before continuing. Do this by attempting to distract yourself to dispel the AOL. Some individuals find it helpful to even set down their pendulum, clear their mind, then pick up where they left off. Remember, your first impression is generally more reliable. Do not second-guess yourself. Questioning yourself is a result of analytical thinking and will have implications on the accuracy of your session. Once each cup has been doused at least once, you may have concluded that 2 or more of the cups could be the correct choice, which is a result of analytical overlay. At this point, make your decision based on your immediate intuitional feeling. Do not try to guess the correct answer. In general, do not take more than a few seconds to make this decision. Remember, sometimes the pendulum's direction may not be entirely clear, especially if the tool appears to be going in a diagonal direction. In those cases, you must use your best judgment to determine which indication is more correct. Also, it is crucial to understand that the movements in the pendulum sample session are exaggerated in order to more clearly demonstrate the process. Since the process entails you to hold perfectly still after the rotation has begun, the movements indicated by the pendulum may be barely noticeable, as they are generated only by micro-movements. In some cases, this means the pendulum may appear to come to almost a standstill, moving only a few millimeters in one direction or another. Pay very close attention to this subtle movement. Some dowsers with more experience actually skip the initial rotation step and simply begin with their pendulum held motionless, allowing their micro-movements to then generate slight swinging in one direction or another. If you feel more comfortable utilizing this alternate initiation step, please feel free to do so. But remember, all the other guidelines presented are still valid and must be followed. Okay, now get ready. You are about to execute your very first dowsing session. At this time, feel free to go back and review the pendulum dowsing sample before proceeding to target 1. But the best way to learn dowsing is to jump right in and try it. Let's proceed. This is going to be an on-site dowsing exercise. Just as with the previous sample, Paul Smith has set up 10 cups numbered from 1 through 10. Underneath one of the cups is a hidden commemorative coin from Paul Smith's Special Forces military unit. Following dowsing protocol, You must first ensure that you consciously understand your feedback indications. For this target, you'll be using the same yes and no responses as before. Next, you must define the task for the dowsing exercise. For this task, your question is defined as, under which cup was the coin hidden? Note that the task is worded in the past tense because this exercise was previously filmed. Keep this in mind when setting up your own targets, which will be covered in greater detail later in the program. You will be presented with footage of each cup on your screen in a random order. As each cup is displayed, begin moving your pendulum in a small circular motion and then try to keep your hand perfectly still. Or if you wish to begin by utilizing the alternative process, simply begin by keeping your hand perfectly still. After a few short seconds, look down to your pendulum and determine the answer you believe your subconscious is providing. In order to reduce analytical overlay, we will be moving quickly through this exercise. A short beep sound will indicate that the next cup is being displayed on your screen. This is to ensure that you won't miss any cups since you won't be constantly looking at your screen. Repeat the dowsing process until each cup is viewed. Remember, if you feel that 2 or more of the cups could be the correct choice, do not try to guess the correct answer, but rather make the decision based on your immediate intuitional feeling. Generally, do not take more than a few seconds to make this decision. Okay, now we're ready to execute your very first dowsing target. At this time, pick up your pen and use either a sheet of white bond paper or a copy of the Target 1 template as previously instructed, which you can download from LearnDowsing.com. You can also manually copy the template from the Learn Dowsing DVD set manual. Make sure you don't have any distractions or noises around you. Verbalize and write down your task. Under which cup was the coin hidden? Do this right now, and then move the paper away from your view. Now focus only on the intent of the task you just verbalized and wrote down. Nothing else should be on your mind. Do not think and do not speak. Only feel. Try to remain completely focused. If you do become distracted, follow the process for dispelling AOLs, which includes briefly setting your pendulum down on the table. Okay, get ready. Pick up your pendulum and begin now. It's important to proceed directly to the target feedback after a session. Please ensure that you have selected an answer to the target before proceeding. If you did not complete the dowsing session, stop, go back, and do it now. If you were confused about how to execute this dowsing session, feel free to go back and review previous lesson segments.
I guess just line up behind a cup and then switch around until you've got them all. Okay, if they're not in any given order, you can get on your little notepad, just write down, and no fear touching the cup. Okay, no fear touching the cup. Okay, are we ready? Yeah. Let's try it.
Paul Smith's commemorative coin was hidden while the students were outside of the classroom. Each student was instructed to remain perfectly silent and have absolutely no contact with the other students around them. Each student recorded his or her answer on a sheet of paper, and the feedback to target 1 was revealed. The commemorative coin was underneath cup number 6. So how did you do? If you got the target correct, remember what it felt like when you selected your cup. If you missed the target, remember what that felt like. Being able to recognize when you're on is just as crucial as being able to recognize when you are not. Remember how you felt during your first session. Recognizing your state of mind and gut feeling during a dowsing session in association with target feedback is crucial for training your subconscious. Were you completely focused? Did you have random thoughts or AOLs? Were you distracted in any way? Did you keep your hand perfectly still, or do you think you were intentionally moving the pendulum? Dowsing is very difficult for most people when you first start out. As Paul Smith previously explained, dowsing is a skill like playing the guitar. Patience, practice, and following directions are the keys to success. As previous scientific experiments suggest, your dowsing skills should improve with practice. We will compare the results from the class after your next target, which will include the use of L-rods. We'll chart out everyone's choices for each target and determine how accurate the students have been. Now that you know the answer to target 1, you may go back and re-execute the target at any time, even after you have completed the Learn Dowsing training set. Even though the target is no longer blind, meaning that you now know which cup the coin was under, it may help to repeat the session while concentrating on your feelings and feedback indications when you're dowsing the correct answer. But remember, dowsing a target that isn't blind, which is referred to as front-loading, provides much greater opportunity to introduce analytical overlay, since your analytical mind already knows the answer. Blind dowsing is far more effective, especially for training purposes. At this time, feel free to pause or stop the DVD and take a break. In the next segment, we'll introduce you to L-rods. Let's learn how to use L-rods, also referred to as dowsing rods. As previously instructed, you should have a set of rods nearby. At this time, please pick them up and begin to familiarize yourself with the weight and feel of the tools as Paul Smith explains how they are used.
We're going to talk about the L-rods. And then after we get done with this, we're actually going to get to try these out on some very simple, basic kinds of dowsing exercises. Okay? First off, when you have your L-rods, we're going to presume you're working with two now, all right? It's hold them in your hands, trying to have them parallel in front of you. That's ready. They're not telling you anything at that point. Okay? So I'll get mine so you can see. Now, some of you have already noticed that they have a tendency to swing around, right? Okay. If you allow them to tilt down just a little bit, okay, they'll have a tendency to stay where they're at, all right? Now, as you're walking along, you have to be careful again because the walking movement, of course, jars how they are. But the goal is to keep them so that they are as close to parallel and in this neutral position as possible, all right? So that's the ready position.
Let's review holding your L-rods. Try to hold the rods perfectly still. Tilt the rods slightly downward, but not too much, just to the point where they no longer rotate freely by themselves. You want the subtle movements generated by your subconscious to be reflected in the rods. However, the movements may be so subtle that if the rods are tilted downward too much, the force of gravity may inhibit movement. You want to find a point at which the rods are barely remaining still and balanced. There are several types of L-rods that are constructed with different materials, lengths, and handles. Each may feel and move differently, so you may want to eventually try out several varieties of rods and utilize the type you feel most comfortable with. Let's continue.
You and your subconscious decide what different motions of these rods mean. The principles of using them are very simple. The actually getting them to be right is where the practice and the more practice comes in. And paying close attention to what it feels like to have these things working correctly. There's always a possibility, remember I warned you up front, there's always a possibility that the analytic side of your mind may take over and make them do things. You're sort of witting to what they're doing, and you have to be very careful to avoid that. Try to defocus your attention such that when they respond, they really are responding to something other than your conscious mind.
Let's program your L-rods. Please follow along. Begin by holding your L-rods out in front of you, with your elbows at your sides. Keep your hands spaced about 3 to 6 inches apart. Now, while allowing the L-rods to move freely, think or say to yourself, "Show me a yes." The resulting reaction, usually consisting of the rods moving in an outward direction, will be the indication for yes. Okay, now to program the no response. Once more, place your L rods in the parallel starting position. Again, while allowing your L rods to move freely, think or say to yourself, "Show me a no." This time, the response should be different, preferably resulting in the rods moving inwards like this. Also note that in many on-site dowsing situations, a neutral response or no movement from the rods can also mean no. Remember, at this point, you are not actually dowsing. Once again, the purpose of doing this is to prepare yourself so that the micro movements generated by your subconscious indicate the correct answer through your L rods. Yes and no responses may differ slightly from one person to another and reflect different degrees of reaction. Let's try the programming process again. Please follow along. Begin by holding your L rods out in front of you, with your elbows at your sides. Keep your hands spaced about 3 to 6 inches apart. Now, while allowing the L rods to move freely, think or say to yourself, "Show me a yes." Okay, now to program the no response. Once more, place your L rods in the parallel starting position. Again, while allowing your L rods to move freely, think or say to yourself, "Show me a no." I'll give you some time to practice a little more on your own. Look away from the screen and remember to focus only on the feedback indications. Try not to be distracted from surrounding noises, colors, and random thoughts. Begin now. Now that you have familiarized yourself with using L rods in the programming process, we'll continue. Let's watch an example of someone executing a dowsing target using L rods. Just as with the pendulum example, the dowsing student will execute a session similar to your next practice target. I'll walk you through what's going on and what you should be thinking as the student performs the dowsing exercise. Remember, this is only a sample, so you can set down your L rods. Be sure to pay close attention to the following instructions and pace of the dowser. Here the student is presented with 10 envelopes. Inside one of the envelopes is a photo of a panda, specifically this panda. The dowser will use the yes and no indications as previously established to determine which envelope has the photo. She has programmed her L rods so that the neutral and inward movement means no, and an outward motion of the rods means yes. Remember, just as with the pendulum, micro movements may be extremely subtle, and rod movements may be caused by something as minor as a small twitch in the arms or hands. Your complete focus here is crucial for being able to identify correct feedback indications. The first step is to write down and verbalize the task. In this case, the dowser will write down the following. Show me which envelope contains the panda photo. The dowser approaches the first envelope and begins by holding the L rods out in front of her while attempting to keep them perfectly still. During this process, the dowser must be focused only on the intent of the specific dowsing task, locating the panda. Remember, you should not verbalize the task because speech is processed by the left hemisphere of the brain. This will influence analytical thought and invite imagination. Do not try to guess the answer, but rather try to feel and recognize your intuitional responses. Do not intentionally make the L rods move in a certain direction, but also try not to focus on the tools too much. Focus only on the intent of the task, finding the panda photo. To help control the intrusion of AOL, try not to take more than 10 seconds to douse each envelope. During this process, you may catch yourself trying to guess the answer or becoming distracted. At this point, you must discard the thought before continuing. Do this by attempting to distract yourself to dispel the AOL. Some individuals find it helpful to even set down their L rods, refocus on the intent, then pick up where they left off. Remember to place more trust with your first impression. Second-guessing yourself may tend to diminish the accuracy of your session. Once each envelope has been doused at least once, you may have concluded that 2 or more of the envelopes could be the correct choice. At this point, make your decision based on your immediate intuitional feeling. Do not try to guess the correct answer. Generally, do not take more than a few seconds to make this decision. Okay, now get ready. You're about to execute target number 2. This is going to be another on-site dowsing exercise. Just as in the sample session, Paul Smith has placed 10 envelopes on a table. One of these envelopes contains a photo of this monkey. Following dowsing protocol, you must first ensure that you consciously understand your feedback indications. For this target, you'll be using the same yes and no responses as before. You will be presented with footage of each envelope on your screen in a random order. As each envelope is displayed, begin the dowsing process. After viewing the envelope for a few short seconds, look down to your L rods and determine the answer you believe your subconscious is providing. In order to reduce analytical overlay, we will be moving quickly through this exercise. A short beep sound will indicate that the next envelope is being displayed on your screen. This is to ensure that you won't miss any video clips, since your attention will be divided between the video and your L rods, and you won't always be looking at the screen. Repeat the dowsing process until each envelope is viewed. Remember, if you feel that 2 or more of the envelopes could be the correct choice, do not try to guess the correct answer, but rather make the decision based on your immediate intuitional feeling. Generally, do not take more than a few seconds to make this decision. Okay, pick up your pen and either use a sheet of white bond paper or a copy of the Target 2 template previously obtained by either downloading this file from LearnDowsing.com or by manually copying the template from the DVD set manual. Make sure to minimize distractions or noises around you as much as possible. Just as with every other dowsing session, you must define the task for this dowsing exercise. Your task will be worded as, "Show me which envelope contains the monkey photo." Verbalize and write down your task. Do this right now, and then move the paper away from your view. Now focus only on the intent of the task you just verbalized and wrote down. Nothing else should be on your mind. Do not think and do not speak, only feel. Try to remain completely focused. If you do become distracted, follow the process for dispelling AOLs, which includes briefly setting down your L rods. Okay, get ready, pick up your L rods, and begin now. It's important to proceed directly to the target feedback after a session so that your feelings and feedbacks are still fresh in your mind. Please ensure that you have selected an answer to the target before proceeding. If you did not complete the dowsing session, stop, go back, and do it now. Just as with Target 1, the photo was shown to the class early on, but was then hidden while the class was outside of the classroom. Each student was informed to remain perfectly silent and have absolutely no contact with the other students around them. Now that the students have completed the target, each class member provides what they individually felt was the correct answer. Paul Smith records everyone's answer on the whiteboard. To ensure that the students weren't affected by another person's response, everyone was instructed to write down his or her answer. Remember, at this time, the target envelope has not been revealed. Let's go back and start with Target 1. It was revealed that the coin was under cup number 6. Here are the students' responses. Note that overlapping responses seem to gravitate more towards number 6. Not too bad for just starting out, but as physicist Harold Puthoff explained in segment 2, military research showed that accuracy rates increased as practice continued. So let's see how you and the class did on target number 2. Nobody dowsed that the photo was in envelope number 1. Only one person believed it was in envelope number 2. 0 for envelope 3. One person for envelope 4. One person for envelope 5. Nobody got a response for envelope 6 or 7. One person for envelope 8. One person for envelope 9. And 3 people believed that envelope 10 contained the hidden photo. It seems that the majority vote is for envelope number 10. Paul Smith finally reveals the target.
Let's just look and see if it's in here, shall we?
Bingo!
Good job, guys.
Good for you.
Good job.
Shockingly, the class got it right. The photo was located in envelope 10. So how did you do? If you got the target correct or were very close, remember what it felt like when you selected your envelope. If you missed the target, remember what that felt like. Recognizing your state of mind and gut feeling during a dowsing session in association with target feedback is crucial for training. You may have noticed that the programming and task phrasing for Target 1 differed slightly from Target 2. The phrasing of a task and your selected feedback indications are crucial for your analytical mind to understand how to recognize data from your subconscious. The different methods utilized to set up tasking and define programming indications can become quite complex and is mostly dictated by the dowsing situation. We still have a lot to cover, so we'll come back to phrasing and programming later in the training set. For now, stay focused on becoming more comfortable with the dowsing steps you have learned so far and getting a better feel for the tools you are using. This concludes the lesson segments presented within Disc 1 of the training set. Please insert DVD number 2 to continue your technical dowsing training. You may also pause or stop the DVD and take a break before proceeding to segment 12. The next segment will cover map dowsing.